think that's an orchestra. It's wonderful. First of all, it's great to hear. Second, Cleo, that was, who is she? I didn't know what I was talking about. The third thing is, listen, my name is Dorothy. Please call me by it. Forget about all this. Right, now I'm going to read this. I'm going to read every word. I've learned by experience never to do anything at all in front of an audience like this. It makes things very difficult when it comes to question time, and I know it's going to be very difficult when it comes to question time. And sorry, this is going to go on for a long time, so I'm sitting comfortably department here. Right, okay, we're off. It's not so much about Gemini, this, as about the whole story of Lionel as well as Nicholas. Lionel's right. It says Lionel has Limondaine and Nicolette. Yes, am I right? Yes. I thought Limondaine was particularly appropriate. Anyway, the first time ever that I could talk about the whole plot. And so that's having called that the ending. You've no idea what it must be like. I feel it a bit like the man who rode flat out from England to Scotland to tell the king he was king, except that guy was lucky. I mean, the king hadn't heard it already. I can't promise the same. All I can say is I ask those who know what I am going to say to look as if you're all hearing it for the first time. I laugh at the jokes that are having. Okay, I wrote the epilogue. I think if I put that there, we're not all right. Or dive into it somewhere. I wrote the epilogue of Gemini first. This is partly for your sake and my publishers, in case I fell under a bus. The end got itself written, and my publishers got very, very nervous about this series. It's a big undertaking. Is she going to live? Is she Hello, Dorothy. I hope you're feeling fine. Instead of faxes, you start getting phone calls so they can judge from the sound of your voice if you knew it or not. But it's also important, the epilogue, because it carries the end of one story and the start of the next. It's another form of God talk, I'm sure is the way you pronounce it. God's talk, it's going to be. It's another form of his bridge. And of course it confirms what's already been hinted, the reason why Sibylla married the first Francis Crawford in secret. And if you think that through, you can guess now, can't you, to within a year, exactly how long Jordan Semple is going to live. Right? Actually, having said that, someone has since asked me whether I mean Jordan will be killed at the Battle of Flodden, which was in 1513. So everyone obviously has some rereading. That's in your Yeah, a lot of Gemini is to do with explaining. I must find the level there. Bit by bit, the connections between the two series. Right. I put that down. And you can still hear me. Yeah. And I can do that. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Nancy. Can I take you home with me? Anyway, I'm not going to start again. A lot of Geminis do with explaining bit by bit the connections between the two series. Once upon a time, I decided I was going to publish the whole family tree when the series was ended. And I think I've changed my mind. To be given the answers like the answer about when Jodie died. Suppose a chance to work it out for yourself. And if you study all the small clues, it really is possible to follow exactly what happened to the central characters. In fact, I'll highlight the clues, if you like, about the Greek with the wooden leg. Not in such depth as Cleo did, but just in one respect. Of his 6 quoted children, you know what I'm talking about? You do. Born by 1476, when he mentioned them, 3 are directly connected with the bloodline, as against those who were important because of some other role. You work it out. Of that 6, I should say 5 were what we would call children, 8 years old or under, while 1 was what the Greek would call a child. Okay? All right. Here's another thing worth thinking about. I'm still booming, but I move away this way. For very good reasons, only some of the fictitious families in one series are connected to those in another. It's partly a matter of taste. I felt it would be a little crude to slop them all together, like Lego. In any case, because I didn't imagine 40 years ago I'd write more than one series, the infrastructure didn't go into the first series right at the beginning. And unless that is done, there's a limit to the number of amazing revelations that can be made smoothly and credibly in the last book. And if there are too many, the whole series changes from being a story into being principally a competition. So, Philippa, for example, has no antecedents that you could trace in the books. Although, of course, she had ancestors, most likely very well known. There were some of those at that time, as it happens, on the Scottish side of the border. And her mother, Kate, could be related, and probably was, to any strong-minded, lively dynasty of the day. This is mixing up fact and fiction in a really big way. I'm moving still further away. Right. And when I fall off there, I'll get the balance absolutely right. There is another family whose line of descent I have half outlined for you. But I've left this one ambiguous. It's up to you to decide which explanation you prefer. I thought you would be happier that way. I'm learning. You did, of course, realize almost at once that the 2 series were connected. Or at least I hope you did. This was why Nicholas was supplied early on with flashes of insight, which he couldn't understand, but you could, because they were all about scenes in the Lyman books. This was going to be a long series, and I hoped once you caught on, which you did, that you would enjoy the next 14 years speculating. You notice that the visions faded a bit after you got it. You know? Thank God you needn't bother me after. You also enjoyed, I think, spotting the fast-forward flashes. Can you remember what they were? I think there is a list somewhere, I've been told. I'm done at work somewhere? Yeah, I'm sure. I wonder how accurate it is. They don't let me on that. I'm going to read you what Everybody noticed the library from Checkmate, yes. And another was the chateau at Amboise, where Robin Stewart fought the boar, and where Nicholas's pendulum spelled out the name. What others? The death news that came twice by a fountain. That was Nicholas hearing of the supposed death of Jealous, and Lyman hearing the supposed death of his mother and brother. The eagle, the child, in the church with the dove, the chessboard and the chair, in the Tyrol, the fiery mill by the river, Torquay, of course, there was a U in both. This officer about Darkness called it these in both. Nicholas approaching Moscow with that marsh fever. Nicholas and the boy in the Troitsa Cathedral. You get that, and the terrible, terrible sense of loss he had. That, by the way, had to do with Lyman and Richard Chancellor, the great navigator who was at the point of becoming his great friend when he died, wrecked off the northeast coast of Scotland when returning from Russia. And you might like to know that at this moment, 65 divers under a Spaniard are working on the very spot where he drowned, using the scenes of Chancellor's death in the Ring Castle. I didn't know about it, I just heard about it a week ago. They're trying to find and bring up the sunk ship. The season, they're diving all September and until the end of October, and the season finishes. And before it resumes in the spring, the local museums are trying to raise a money prize for the diver who brings up the first authenticated article from the Edward Bonaventure. I'll try to let you know what happens about that in promised time. I should also say perhaps here, what did I do to stop this by boop boop? There, right. Looking back on that part of the story, you might wonder whether it should have been Lyman's destiny, as it was, to come in from the cold, to return to love and humanity, as he did. Or why he, if he should in fact have given up, let me start that again. Whether it should have been Lyman's destiny, as it was, to come in from the cold, to return to love and humanity, instead of giving it up, as he did, learn when to give. I've obviously retired. Let me just say this. Should he have stayed, in fact, in Russia and given up what he came back to, which was his destiny? Or would the world have changed if he had stayed and, as he had done before, become totally selfless, remain cold, remain withdrawn, but given all his gifts to this great nation which could have had a great developing future? It's just a thought. And it's just as well for me that he did happen to come back and and anymore. To return to those visions of Nicholas, all those double scenes, the double takes, help, don't they, to point out the differences between Lyman and Nicholas. But they also remind you they have a great deal in common. So let's have a look at them both and see what we can prove. It can only be a very rough route, but you may find it interesting to go through all the books and see how often they deal with situations or dilemmas that are either parallel with one another or the exact opposite, and then how their motives and reactions compare Notice, by the way, that I call Nicholas by his first name. So does everybody. But Lyman doesn't invite that. I don't think of him ever as Francis. For some reason, it's too close, it belittles him. In fact, when you look at them both, it's the differences you notice most. Again, with an appearance, of course, Lyman is in every way strikingly attractive in colouring and physical graces. We're never quite sure how tall he is. But he's not less than average. Nicholas is tall and large-boned, of undistinguished hair and complexion, and not one to bother too much as a youth about his carriage or looks. But he learned. I hope you appreciated the training course Nicholas is doing to make up for the lack of all that Lyman was born to. It was in its way a little like the training that Philippa was to undergo to fit her for Lyman. Except that, of course, Nicholas came before Lyman. So what the training shows us, in fact, is which skills blossomed in training and might therefore be considered to be part of their common heritage. For example, athletic pursuits in time changed Nicholas's appearance. He would never be comely, but he carried himself as if he were. He was not incidentally based on any special painting or sculpture, and neither was Lyman, although I have mentioned some that have features in common. I'm really very sorry that Donatello's sketch of Nicholas didn't actually exist. But I did discover, after I'd been to the chapel of the Grand Master's palace in Rhodes, that there was a statue there that I missed. It's by Donatello of Saint Nicholas. I've never seen even a reproduction of it. And yes, no, even the expert, right. And if anybody ever finds one, let me know. It'd be strange, if unlikely, to find that he'd sculpted a big man with large eyes and a beard that might even hide dimples. But that's, by the way, Lyman, when we meet him, was already personable and had all the advantages. Lyman was brought up as heir to an estate, and we were trained by master-at-arms and take part in wars and forays from his earliest years. He fought at the Battle of Pinkie. Nicholas had never handled a sword. Nicholas never fought anybody. When it became imperative, he received his military training from Astor and the masters at Milan. He learned his social skills from Violante. Violante? You haven't seen the opera yet. Yeah. It would be even better if he had seen the opera. I've got a visiting card as well. You don't know what I'm talking about, but you will after tonight. But he learned, dear Nicholas, at the courts also, which employed him, beginning with Trebizond. He had to be taught how to ride. Lyman was highly educated, both at university and at home, and had the use of his own and the family library. He continued to read. Did you notice the Cicero? Yes. Ah, you did, good, yes. But by his life, by its nature, was violently active, not contemplative, and his learning tended to be applied to what he was doing, which was generally the development of a command, either political or military, in a very wide area. Nicholas had already received a second-hand university training as servant to Felix, and added to that in subsequent years, beginning again with the scholars at Trebizond, and moving through the months after Marian's death, when he took that long journey alone across Europe, testing himself, making new intellectual discoveries before being snatched off to Cyprus. And all that he ended the teaching of Timbuktu, as Pierre was saying, later of Cairo and Kaffa, and the scholars of Poland. He didn't then possess Lyman's advantage of an orthodox education, but what he did have was more conducive to speculative thinking, perhaps, fortified by his gift for mathematics and puzzles. Intellectually, then, each was supplementary to the other. What else? Lyman learned about sailing from 2 years in the galleys. Nicholas had to be taught by John LeGrant. Both of them had a natural bent for navigation, the arithmetic of the sky. For Nicholas, it's an extension of the advanced mathematical principles he already knew. Lyman knew something of it. Remember, he studied in France at 15, but had his eyes fully opened by Chancellor. They both loved the sea and found release in it. Physical courage, they both have that. They are both, strangely, without fear of death. In Nicholas, the first part of his life is a kind of solidity. He simply doesn't fear the idea of oblivion, perhaps partly because he has nothing to lose. Lyman's courage comes from sources even more negative. He is suicidal, which Nicholas is not. Lyman won't endanger his men, but he has no attachment to life. He tries to leave over and over, as if overwhelmed by some need. Nicholas never does, except once on Mount Sinai, when he dreads what harm the war between himself and Jealous might do. Leadership qualities. Nicholas and Lyman both have them, but their upbringing has been very different, and so are their natures. Both engender love and loyalty in their followers, but attracted in different ways. Lyman is highly strung, as the saying goes. In his case, it means he is a man driven by passions, who's had to devise a method of controlling them and of protecting himself. This he does by holding himself apart from his associates. To those who don't know him, to us, when we meet him at first, he is arrogant, he is caustic, he is unfeeling, he allows no one close. Think, and it's an odd example, how seldom we find him asleep. We know that because of the opium, he sleeps alone when he can. When he has to have some form of relief, he buys it from prostitutes or finds oblivion in drink. The opposite you'll have noticed to Nicholas, who manages himself so much better in many ways. When Nicholas is exhausted or stressed, he forces himself to drink nothing but water. To us, it's the first sign, often, that something is wrong. Neither needs very much sleep, but of the two, Nicholas takes it wherever he is without expectation or privacy. Think of the night before that great play Claire was mentioning, when Jealous gives him a bed and watching has to hold back from touching him. Then think of Lyman, awake, amused, studying his mistress. On a few occasions when Lyman is content or fulfilled in what he is doing, think of when he was dreamlessly asleep aboard Chancellor's ship with his salt-tangled hair, asleep in France after the taking of Guigne, his breathing quiet, his scarred wrists lying free in the blankets, as the ships bring his mother and brother from Scotland. And the opposite, after the murderous chess game, drugged asleep in the great bed with Philippa, when Lyman, brushing against her by chance, is shocked awake by the touch, and then driven into despair because he has no clear idea of what happened, or whether he dreamed she was one of his bedmates. Or in Scotland, when, hounded by Gabriel, he falls asleep at Flaw Valleys, guarded by Philippa's mother. I'll give you my soul, the blackberry pie, and I, the cutlery. Kate knows Francis Crawford. Those who don't know him follow him because they fear him, but also because they trust his qualities as a commander. He is a highly trained military leader, gifted enough and experienced enough to be made a Marshal of France, and he knows how to bind his men to him by unbending when he has to, and joining them in a ploy, or perpetrating a joke, or indulging in bouts of marvellous, unbridled excess. His officers, too, come to him because of his professional excellence, but stay eventually as friends, because they see gradually that he is not what he seems, and that despite all appearances, he is a man who holds honour dear and who tries to live by his principles. We have no such certainty with Nicholas. He is not trained to lead. He has initially no experience in warfare or military strategy, and being taught by men who can manage a company, but have never led a country to war. Toby, under the Count of Urbino, has probably seen more of great wars than Nicholas has. But Nicholas has imagination and ingenuity of the kind he showed in Trebizond, and in Cyprus, and in Africa. And he carries men with him by using the techniques he had to learn to survive in his childhood and through his apprenticeship and the early days of his marriage to Marion. The techniques of empathy, the opposite of Lyman's preferred method. Nicholas is close to his men. He is one of them. They follow him because he is a likable youth who is better at most things than they are, but still gets into trouble as they do. Thus, he extends his career without making enemies outside his family, who could be jealous of Nicholas. But as Lyman is not as he seems, so Nicholas is not as he seems. And we have cause to doubt him for very much longer. A demon lurks, someone hints, within that artisan clay. His own circle notice at first that Nicholas will accept blow after blow, but when pushed beyond endurance, will retaliate. The deaths that occur are not directly his fault, and we do see his dismay when things go wrong. When things go wrong, as when Isolta is involved in Jack's downfall. In fact, Lyman has a much quicker temper than Nicholas and responds with violence more readily. Nicholas has to learn to show anger, but is not incapable of it, and when deeply stirred, will certainly break his own rules. He genuinely tried to kill Simon once in response to his goading over Umar. He responded finally in Poland to Julius's continual attempts on his life. He set up the Ganadoria to die, although he stayed with him until the end. He let it be known that Prima Flora was sterile, which might not be lethal, but which would end her prospects at court. and he left Adelina locked alone with her knife and her husband, knowing that Julius would kill her. But then, so did Lyman allow Gabriel to kill his own sister. He made mistakes, lapses which were knocked down to temper. Because of him, indirectly, Christian died and Robin Stewart, and Lyman stayed with them both at the end, recognizing what he had done, as Nicholas did. Both he and Nicholas faced moral dilemmas and had to choose between the lesser and the greater good, no matter what oaths were broken, such as the one that Lyman took in the Church of St. Giles. This striving after good, this awareness of failure, and what made so potent Guzel's thoughtless remarks after she and Lyman had made love in Russia. She says, roughly, "Relax, I too have done unforgivable things, we are two of a kind," remember? And she means well. But by taking him at her own lowest values, she's confirming all his own fears, the evaluation of himself which one day he will lay before Philippa. Notice that the mistake is Guzel's, that she fails to treat Lyman as a man of worth, unlike the rest she has known. Whereas Adelina, inciting Nicholas to incest, does so precisely because she is aware of his scruples and leaves him to suffer eventually. But what about Nicholas? Despite his upbringing, he seems at first to have emerged a better balanced young man than Lyman's. Only, you have to remember that he only survived childhood by learning to subdue all his gifts. It was when he was given freedom to bring them into the open that he became charmed by his own powers, and the extravagant disaster in Scotland took place, fueled, it must be said, by his frustration and anger over what had happened between Simon and Jonas. Over and over again, Nicholas became entranced by the detail and forgot to look at the broad picture. That he had to be taught, as his friends knew. And in the end, despite his mistakes, he did learn his lesson. You'll notice perhaps one of the many ironies. Lyman went back to Scotland to save it from Gabriel. Nicholas went there to wreck it, and then returned to make restitution because it was right, not from any deep love of the country. For yet another contrast, Nicholas was spiritually stateless. His mother was from Burgundy, once part of France and then taken over by the Duke who ruled Flanders. His father was Scottish, but disowned him, and Nicholas had never seen his own land. He'd spent years in Geneva, which was under Savoy, and in Bruges, which was a trading station full of foreign colonies, was young with his friends. If he had any ties, they were to Bruges because of that and because of Madeline, his wife. Lyman had been born in France and spent a great deal of time there, but he was of stock that was overwhelmingly Scottish. And wherever he was, Scotland was his love and his home. Self-exile to Muscovy was for him perfectly terrible. He could not return, for if he met Richard, it would prove, he believed, that Sibylla had lied. Hence the inhuman behavior, the absolute withdrawal in Russia, and the appalling return with Sibylla's betrayal. set against the wonder of seeing his own country again. I used music, incidentally, for that moment of Lyman's return. Music by Carver. It seemed appropriate then, and even more appropriate when I came to write about Nicholas. For it's likely that Carver, the composer, his real name was Arnott, which was also the name of Nicholas's busy small abbot of Kenneth. And Henry Arnott had a kinsman called David Arnott, also Kenneth, who in real life, wait for it, was to occupy the genuine Euphemie Adorn's house in the Lithgow. So just as Henry Arnott came to occupy an actual Edinburgh house with a double cellar, quite by chance, historically spanned the two series, from Game of Kings right down to Gemini, and became attached, but only in fiction. Just sneeze. And while we're mentioning music, both men, Lyman and Nicholas, are musicians. Nicholas doesn't know it. Whistle Willie and Kathy discover it, and Nicholas incorporates it into his life, like his other skills, for social and practical purposes, and clearly enjoys it as well. Only sometimes we notice, as outside the church in Trebizond, he will find his thinking inconveniently overturned by an emotion. Later, he cannot bear for a long time to hear any music that reminds him of Umar. For Lyman's music is fused into all his deepest emotions, beginning, no doubt, with the years when it characterized and plumbed the difference between himself and Gavin Crawford, his supposed father. High-handed, cool-headed, barb-tongued, Lyman was equipped to outface every assault except music. Music broke through. Music threatened to expose him, and so he eliminated it. He blocked it with words, with poetry, as Nicholas blocked unwanted thinking with numbers. Except once, you may remember, when poetry filtered unexpectedly in. Only after the Hall of the Rebels and Lyman's shock of self-knowledge over Philippa did he allow music to speak for him, to express his feelings, to celebrate what had happened before he shut it away once again, this time for good, he thought. So, two men of considerable depth, both experiencing strain and attempting in different ways to deal with it. Alone, they didn't usually succeed. Lyman, walking his tightrope in the name of his responsibilities to his country, his family, all those he loved, required someone balanced and cool who understood him. At first, Christian and Kate fulfilled part of that role, and sometimes his friends at St. Mary's. Lyman, you might say, was multifaceted, and later Philippa promised to close the circle. Nicholas was less so, and was going to need more than one person. We see early on that Nicholas too is disadvantaged. However sturdy and balanced he seems, he has no country. He has a broken, disaffected family and an adult identity still to make for himself. All that he might overcome, except that he has no sense of conserving his resources. Launched on any scheme, he doesn't know when to stop. Whatever he does, he overspends his energy until he is drained. He needs a friend, such as Budskov or Umar He needs management. Later, her own abundance of activity better channeled, Kathy comes to his help, and he finds other relief in his marriage, the relief whose denial caused such havoc for Lyman and 7 years. By the way, if I could break off here for a moment. Did you notice the history of 7 years? Good. I always forget to check up on all of that. For example, if you're British reading Gemini, I'm not so sure if the rest of you will have noticed. I'll enjoy the reference to Sandy, Bloody Sandy. No, I find a Brit to explain that one to you. And if I tell you I have a friend called Thelma Schoonmaker, you may understand the reference in Caprice and Rondo to Sally Janita. Work on that one. It's quite obscure, you ought to be able to get it. Then in earlier books there were those references to Gilbert and Sullivan. I know you cracked that one. The key was the word ruthless. And the George Eliot quote, that one. And of course the last hint of apricots in the final pages of Caprice and Rondo, in a context I hoped you'd remember. Right, let's get back to Lyman and Nicholas. What about the way they dealt with children? First, perhaps, how they cope with young men. Lyman first. He has his own method of those. Think of Will Scott. Lyman was not the kind of born teacher that Nicholas was, but he set out to capture that rebellious young man and return him trained to his father. And he nearly succeeded. In Muscovy, he showed wisdom with Chancellor's son, and later with Ludo Dacour, he held back and gave him the same kind of chance that long ago Julius and Adelina had been given by Nicholas. But Nicholas was a teacher. He wanted a stake in the world, such as Umar had. And that was not a stake in its riches. Nicholas had no ambition. He wanted success only to please those he loved. And you could say that Lyman had no interest either in his personal reputation. But Lyman came early to an understanding of the mismanagement of the world and of his own ability to make a difference. Nicholas had no perspective at all until he was far older than Lyman had been. And even then, he attached his interest to people rather than ideas, although these were developing. And for Nicholas, children were people. We see him with Adorn's children and the young Janus. We see him with Marian's daughters, and then with Felix, and how cleverly he deals with Felix. Then there is Dinas, in misery after the death of his father, set to toil in the degradation of the dye works, but in fact being taught what he will need to return to run the charity business. Then Robin of Beercroft's brought gently from childhood to be helped through the greatest trial of his life. And of course, the two sons born to Nicholas himself. Jody, whom he takes to himself, but still takes care not to alienate from his mother. And Henry, the heartbreaking disaster of Henry, who tries to kill Nicholas, who tries to kill Jody, who hates and fears his grandfather and despises his father, and yet is bonded to them both. So that his greatest fear is that Nicholas and his grandfather will combine to reject him. And Nicholas treats it all with such patience and seems sometimes to gain ground, but in fact never would. It is too late. We see Lyman, too, tenderly alone with a child. And the circumstances are very alike. Unknown to him, Una was carrying his son, just as unknown to Nicholas, Katerina became pregnant by him. In neither case was the father given a chance to take his responsibility as he would have wanted. Lyman was forced to traverse the world seeking his son. Nicholas was forced to leave Henry to be reared paradoxically in the estate that was his, knowing that to claim him was impossible. And then, compounding that, his second son was kept from him, pawn in the war between Nicholas and his wife until Nicholas found him. Only, unlike Lyman, he had the certainty that the boy Jody was his. So what does it tell you about the two men? Lyman can feel for a child. We see him as his own and as Richard's. He has, as Nicholas has, a profound sense of responsibility towards them. But his concern, though fond and real, would always be more adult than Nicholas's. While giving time to a child, he would always see beyond the child to the man and his place in society. Nicholas, on the other hand, was perhaps too good with children. He is an expert in human nature. He can relate to little ones and bind them to him with ease, as he did with Adorn's young. In return, he is given and accepts a torrent of unquestioning love. Dangerous drug, and one that is addictive. He inspires love from adults as well, until the attachment becomes too serious or too smothering, and he has to take thought and deal with it. There is a downside then to those generous impulses. For example, despite Nicholas's precautions, they arouse jealousy. And while we're on children, you'll have noticed that none of the fictitious families are big ones. This has a practical reason. Cuts down the list of characters at the beginning.
But what?
There are all these historical characters, and the rest really have to be kept within bounds. But, historically, it's not far off the mark either. Although many children were born, the rate of survival was low. Sisters and brothers were often given the same name, on the assumption that some were going to die anyway. And it altered the perception of children. No one really knew if they were going to grow up until they were out of babyhood. And child rearing was different. The idea of a close family unit with siblings reared at home and tended by mother and father didn't really apply to families of any standing at that time. Children were a matter of pride. Every man wanted a son. They were a necessity for continuing the inheritance. They were a bargaining counter in the marriage market. They were future assets to the church and government. In youth, they might be supervised by a parent, but they were in the daily care of nurses and tutors, and later of the households in which they were training. One of the reasons why the story of Lyman ended when it did was the difficulty of squaring 16th century married life with the one that modern readers would expect. In the marriage of Nicholas, for example, he and Gillis were only enabled to initiate and continue their war and their subsequent partnership because he was a merchant and she too was active in business as Mary and Dorothy had been. So they formed a household, which was rare, except in the same way an artisan workshop would have parents and children living together and working as a team, as they would also on the land, as apprentices did in a dye yard, cared for by their master, as Nicholas did. But property owners ran things quite differently. There's another point to mention here too, perhaps, about families and inheritance. There's a great deal of talk in both series about bastardy and invalid marriages and crimes such as incest. These were legislated for by very strict rules of the church. Unfortunately, when it came to major political players, the very strict rules of the church were amenable to every kind of subversion. If policy demanded that marriage should be regarded as legal, then it would be fixed, no matter what it took. Children could be announced legitimate or transformed into bastards, like the first family of Albany, and the children of his sister Mary Boyd. It depended on who you were and whom you knew and what advantage was to be gained from it. Not suggesting either that all this was purely venal. On the contrary, much of it was extremely sensible, and like the old Irish customs, often allowed a good man to rule in place of a lesser one. So bastardy wasn't much of an issue by itself. Lyman was not necessarily distraught because he'd been born on the wrong side of the blanket, any more than Martin was. It was his mother's deception that caused the anguish. And the sequence of relationships that threatened the legality of Nicholas's marriage and that of his kindred was a threat not because it was a threat in fact because it was not in anyone's interest at that point to support him in securing his family. Also, of course, he had his own reasons, much of the time, for not lodging a complaint or inviting investigation. So his difficulties ebbed and flowed. It was also, I may say, very convenient for the author. Needs all the help she can get. But we're not concerned much today about the author or the material or the techniques. We're still talking about the two men. And we haven't spoken yet of the subject that any time I'm allowed to listen to a website seems to occupy a large number of posts. We've only touched on their private. We haven't touched on their private lives. And their record with women, right? Yes, we've touched very lightly. Let us go further into the topic. What do we know? Women. Well, they lived at a time when, as ever, there's a great deal of extracurricular activity from a very young age. And both Lyman and Nicholas, of course, did their best to conform to the norm. And succeeded, I think, my cooperation. But because their early experience was different, they came to act differently later on. When under duress, Lyman resorted, as we noticed, to commerce with strangers. At other times, he made an ordinary use of the houses frequented by his troupe or his hosts, and was highly thought of by the worldly ladies who served him in Dieppe, at the Ostrich, or elsewhere. When the pirate Thompson begged Hawk Isa from his bed, she would be flattered that a jewel passed as token and there would be no ill will on either side. It was the opposite of the selling of Maybelline, who was not a professional whore, and whose treatment so incensed Nicholas and Felix's mother. But the whole experience of Lyman and Nicholas was very different. Lyman had been introduced to damaging intercourse by Margaret Lennox and was subjected to attempted assault at the very least in the galleys. His own desires might have been, and probably were, wholly heterosexual, but he was undoubtedly familiar with every variation and would seduce regardless of sex for a purpose. He tried to beguile Una from Cormac and nearly succeeded. He maintained Jarrett's integrity by abandoning his own in North Africa. He was ready to offer himself again to Margaret Lennox in return for a secret. And to Guzel, he gave himself as well as a power base in Russia, in return for which she set his friends free and the child. With a record like that, there's no possibility that the accusations were true that linked Lyman illicitly with his sister. It would have been extremely odd if he had made a stealthy second visit to Una. Please. At the same time, there were other seductions, other affairs less than high-minded. Julita challenged him rather nastily, and he beat her at her own game. He courted Catherine Dalton as a courtesy when marriage at last seemed inevitable. As Teddy Boy Ballard, he prostituted himself as half a French court, male and female, ostensibly to establish his alibi, but more likely from willful frustration because he was sick of being used and bored with the dead end he had come to and curious to see just how far he could go. This was an echo, in fact, of the behavior of Nicholas, prostituting his talents in Scotland, except that instead of ruining Scotland, Lyman was experimenting with decadent France, pushing it nearer and nearer to destruction beneath the indulgent eye of O'Leary, until at last O'Leary balked as he was meant to. But self-indulgence is not easy to stop, and by then Lyman himself had gone much too far and was out of control until fate stepped in and stopped him. And Nicholas, think of what happened to him in Geneva. Yet he was not harmed by Isotta's perversion and grew naturally into friendly, uninhibited dalliance with every girl he could get. At the time, he didn't understand what Jack was doing to others and didn't experience it himself. Later, he was simply to see Jack as a wretch and was more disturbed in the end by Jordan de St. Paul's mania and the destruction it caused. Making love was part of Nicholas's normal life and flowed through it to blossom in later marriage with the best partner he had ever found. With Lyman, it was bitterly different, as seen by the long stretches of abstinence and then the insupportable deprivation at 70. But was the difference wholly down to environment. What would have happened had Lyman lived at Geneva and Nicholas had met Margaret Lennox? I think Jack de Fleury would have died. I think a compliant Nicholas would have left Margaret Lennox unsuspecting and then used his skills to arrange that she and her husband fell from grace long before they actually did. And that's changing the whole course of Tudor history. But in this respect, I think Lyman and Nicholas possessed different temperaments, as could be seen from the women they chose. Which brings me to the one. First, their mothers. Lyman was born to Sibylla and Nicholas to Sophie. Infancy, we have to imagine, in each case was idyllic. In each case, the mother spent more time than was customary with her son. Later, in both cases, the trust was shattered. Lyman learned that all his life his mother had deceived him and that he would always come second to his mother's love for the first Francis Crawford. Nicholas suffered abandonment. His mother took her own life, leaving him to face Geneva alone. You might think, by the way, it was then that he formed the resolution, or it was formed in his bone and blood, that he would never lightly let down his own kind. Only gradually, as Nicholas matured, did he begin to understand his own mother, and then to forgive. It was a mark of his special maturity that he never really tried to replace her. And when his marriage to Marion came, he gave up what he needed himself and took the part of the lover. As a result, neither Lyman nor Nicholas invited mothering, although Lyman received it well disguised from men like Archie, who saw as others did not how desperately vulnerable he was. As a child, Nicholas received it, also disguised, from Marion de Charente up to his meeting with Simon and just beyond. When the relationship with Marion changed, no one really replaced her in the mothering role. Of the girls Nicholas knew, Catalina used him and gave him nothing. The girls of his own kind were uncomplicated playmates with no idea what went on in his head. Of the men, Adorn chastised and instructed him. Others made no concessions, he didn't seem to need them. Only Toby, as a doctor, glimpsed trouble occasionally behind some physical weakness that was generally prevented by suspicion from wanting to find out what it was. Belle certainly did see something was wrong, but rarely did more than offer her own presence, partly because she respected his pride and partly because of her own concern with de Riberac. In fact, what Lyman and Nicholas needed was not a haven, but a source of intelligent understanding. Lyman had it briefly with Chancellor, and then realized overwhelmingly the best chance he would have, both intellectually and physically, was with Philippa. The trouble he then had to overcome was her inability to accept him. The antithesis, it might be noticed, of Nicholas's experience with Marion. Eventually, Lyman's problem was solved, but Nicholas was faced with a challenge which became the means in the end of making him what he was to become. He and Jealous were natural lovers. But she was haunted by the spectre of her sister. Was she jealous as substitute for Catalina? Was she better or less well endowed than Catalina had been? Catalina had borne a beautiful child and had had two lovers, Nicholas and Simon, while Janus was still an unattractive young virgin. Janus had to prove that she excelled her sister in all of that, and also in areas where Catalina had never been tested. She wanted to beat Nicholas intellectually as well in his life, in his business. For if she didn't, she would be no better than Catalina had been. She would be less than Catalina. And Nicholas, with his perpetual empathy, understood and let her do as she wanted, once he had overcome the shock of her announcement, which he knew to be false, even though he went blisteringly through the motions of proving it. He sustained her campaign because, for one thing, he loved her and knew he would never find such a match anywhere else. For another, he knew that she could not live until she had proved herself one way or another, and that she was going to fail, and that by then she would have discovered that failure didn't matter, not to him, and more importantly, not to herself. But he also knew that what Janus could give him was one sort of love and one sort of understanding, and that there was room for another. It isn't usual in romance to have more than two lovers, one boy, one girl, in a story. In a physical sense, I followed the rule and shown only two in each series, Lyman and Philippa, Nicholas and Janus. But in real life, different natures often require different people outside marriage to complement them. Nicholas learned in Persia about the boon companion, faithful friend whom kings install in their lives to ease and divert them. Powerful men have them today. Most people, unless they're very unlucky, have friends of both sexes who fulfill certain roles, who help to make their lives complete. The relationship between Nicholas and Kathy was of that order. In turn, Nicholas gave his strength to uphold many others, including the king and his siblings, and at the last, even his own mentor, Adorn. Through life, he had learned not to seek or expect a replica of himself, but to look for friendship in others with certainly something in common, but also additional qualities for him to understand and assimilate to round his own character. That is where he stands when, toward the end, Dr. Andreas finally enters. The 15th century toyed with many ideas, as we do. You may believe them, and I may believe them, or we may not. Some of them have played a part in this story. I've used divining in the sense of plumbing for minerals because that is wholly authenticated. I've used transmission of feelings with no more than a slight feeling of license. I haven't dealt seriously with prophecy, except insofar as Lyman certainly believed it enough to be afraid of it. As for the end, there are various theories about time. one can speculate. You may remember, Nicholas certainly would, the basket of secrets with the souls packed away, waiting their turn to emerge. You might think that what drew Lyman to the brink again and again was a call he felt but could not understand. And if it was, as Andreas thought, then Nicholas was perhaps the fittest to bear his own fate, to die first and wait until the day when the great missing piece slots into place and the soul is complete. For what? To be born again? And if so, for what purpose? For some single great deed without which the whole of history would have been changed? To establish a bloodline? But brilliant fathers may not have brilliant sons. Or simply to put into the world a man of vision to influence and serve his own kind with the qualities we have come to value or miss among other leaders in this long, long journey through different cultures and lands? I don't know. I've left the debate open. But I thought it more interesting that way. But you may like to remember that in Checkmate, on the last page of the last book, Lyman speaks about this. He says to his wife, we are the road, we are the bridge, we are the conduit. He's not necessarily speaking of his descendants. He's speaking of all those who, because of him, might think or act differently in future. And I am speaking of the magic circle enclosing the storyteller and the silent listener and the soul of the story, which is not complete after 40 years in the making. Seemed to be a wonderful time. I hope that with or without me, it will go on with its only task, which is to give pleasure. Herrings lived happily ever after. My memory may let me down at this point, but I think they had 13 children. Yes.
Having written the Lyman Chronicles first, and going back to writing House of Nicola, and deciding it was going to fit House of Nicola into the Lyman Chronicles, was there anything you held up against the Lyman Chronicles that you wish you could have changed or made different if the House of Nicola.
Right, frequently. The question is, when I decided, if I'm interpreting properly, I wrote the Lyman series first. When I decided to do the House of Nicola, did I come up against any problems in fitting it into the Lyman? Not really. It was quite difficult to find things in the Lyman Chronicle which were still vague enough to require answering through the Nicholas series. But I found something, and that was it. As I was saying, I could have, if I designed those series from the beginning, I would have made subterranean links between the two, and perhaps would have slotted in a few more of the families together if it could have come more easily. No, in fact, it's slightly the other way, and serendipity had a great part to play in this whole business, because I had found this house I was talking about with sneeze features, which occurred in the bottom. The Jarden of Applecross family, Jarden of Applegarth family, turned out to figure in both. I don't know if you noticed, and if you go right, you have, yes. That was accidental, but fortunately they were on the right side for me, and that was okay. No, I think if there had been anything too much in the way of an obstacle, I wouldn't have gone ahead with this idea of linking them when I was planning it out. But people are always saying in what order to read everything, because they were designed so differently. And I think my final advice was to start with Lyman's, and go right through, and then read through the whole of Nicola, which is of course before Lyman time, and then read Lyman at the end. Then you'll understand everything. And somebody else, yes.
What was wrong with John of Mar? I don't quite understand it.
What was wrong with John of Mar?
What was the ailment? What was the mental?
Ah, yes. Shall I do my little lecture on this very, very quickly?
Yes.
Right, okay. Have you seen the film The Madness of King George?
Yes.
Right. Well, this was, he was, periodically very violent, very subject to aches and pains and mood changes, and a very curious red flush was spread over his face. And they discovered this was an ailment called porphyria, which runs in the royal family. They've traced it by digging out and doing DNAs on a test with descendants of King George, and they've also traced it back the way. There are people who reigned in Britain, who were carriers, didn't necessarily display the symptoms, but it has been thought it goes back as far as Mary Queen of Scots. And if it did so, then James III, who features in the Lyman stories, was Mary Queen of Scots' great-grandfather. And what we know of the extraordinary willfulness and violence and these odd attacks where people simply collapsed and had these severe pains and became very violent are all symptoms of porphyria. So it seemed very likely that what made this particular group of 5 siblings in the royal family, that this was what afflicted them. And it's wound in to the story. I don't name it because it's not been proved. But if anybody has become aware of this illness, it's quite interesting, because it hardly goes as far back as James II, his father, who he murdered somebody in a total fit of violence at one point. And again, it's only my personal view that it seems to fit in. I thought with Toby on the scene, somebody ought to die. Yes.
When Cleo's talk, did you...
I'll come back to you. That's all right, go on.
In like Cleo's talk, did you start out with Nicholas to write an epic, or was it all sort of simple?
Well, it depends what you call an epic. I mean, Cleo's description of it was absolutely wonderful, and I would have been afraid to start anything like that. What I wanted to do certainly was to cover 20 odd years, which the period was incidentally. Sorry, I forgot to repeat the question, but it was when did I start to set out to write an epic? It had to cover a period which ended in Adorn's death. It was going to be about 23 years. This is why Nicholas started so young. And I wanted to show it developing all over the world, so that by its nature, it was going to cover a lot of history, and various themes began to emerge as I was going, which made it a kind of thing. But no, I didn't say, I am going to write an epic. It doesn't have a thing like that. Sorry, somebody at the back who, what was it? Yes?
Can I ask you a different question? I want
Yes?
to ask about Kathy's disorder, because I know some of what those symptoms.
Kathy's disorder.
Kathy
Yes, well, don't you know people like that? I know a number of people like that who have absolutely, what was Kathy's disorder, who have no sense of when they are becoming overstrained or overstressed. And it is simply this, what you get if you work without pause for 3 days and nights on end. You collapse like that. And this kept happening to her when she was young because she simply went at everything and did everything far too violently. I know one or two people who rather sadly died from this kind of thing where nobody could, I suppose it's a form of hyperactivity, really. But she had the total solution, of course, sadly, was that her marriage with Robin and his injury meant that her life was totally filled with that, which calmed her down. And in a way, it was why I was trying to establish what it was, why any other partnership between Kathy and Nicholas in the early years would have been fatal because he was of the same nature, and they would have killed one another just by, whether they were physically partners or not. Simply, they were going too high rate. Yes.
I wonder about the last Johnson book.
I sent it to my publisher, yes. I would love to do one. I don't know. These are the thrillers. I've written 7 of them. There is room for an 8th. They are all rather curious because each one comes out at quite an interval between each, and they're set in very much in their own period. And Johnson's probably 205. This book will follow immediately, if I do it, will follow immediately on the last. There'll be a gap of about 7 years in vernacular and customs and clothes and everything else. So it depends on whether people don't mind that kind of fantasy. I mean, it's a kind of fantasy already, it's just a common fantasy. The other great thing is I've got to go back to sailing again if I do it. Take the yachting monthly once more, learn that, because ships change, boats change, Dolly change. I mean, what do I call it? Dolly the clone. But I don't know is the answer. Wait till I go back first. Yes.
Nicholas always seems to be on the losing side of every battle in war.
Nicholas always seemed to be on the losing side of every battle in war. I think that was the fault of history, actually. I couldn't find a lot of enjoyment on the winning side. I was also trying to say something about sieges, if you notice, all the way through in Alexander Nicholas. The time when, just before guns were really very efficient, when people would settle down to perpetrate a siege for something like 6 months. So the sieging army just set up a town, and, markets and peddlers and houses and all this kind of thing, and wore people down. And then you had other sieges like the one of Famagusta, which was absolutely dreadful, where they really did starve them out from month after month after month, and Nicholas experienced that. And then you had in Gemini this farcical siege of Edinburgh Castle. It was just a total joke. I mean, it was just all right so that John not to appear too fat before they came out. But it's largely history that did it. Somebody around here has had a hand up there. Yeah? Yes.
Can you comment on your authorial purpose in having Nicholas find the ability to divine?
And Nicholas finding the ability to command.
To divine.
To divine.
Yeah.
Oh yes, right. Why did I do that? A very good question. It was partly because I found somebody who is a professional diviner, and my husband came across it. My husband had a lot to do naturally with the oil industry. And it was he who told me the oil industry actually employed diviners, of course, to find the cage oil, and it was absolutely authentic. And then I found this marvelous person who knew a great deal about it. And I introduced it, I think, because I was having to introduce the fast-forward visions for your benefit. Right? And so we were kind of slightly into another dimension with that, and I wanted to link it. Also, it gave him a reason in the Tyrol for it. They found his divining there. He was able to divine for silver and so on. And it had a little bit to do with the plot, but not a great deal. In fact, he took out the divining. I think the plot would hang together probably. I don't know. I just probably got intrigued myself. I don't know what to take. Right, yes.
I thought it initially was an echo from when you introduced Nostradamus, the healing of Lyman. that there was a hint of the occult and horror scene in that?
A hint of the occult when I used Nostradamus in the healing of Lymond. Did I? What did I do? Yeah, well, yes, of course, the shamans in Russia, there's a bit of that as well. I think, you have to imagine there were all these systems going on and available and believed in by people at the time. And I think, that you could get a therapy from somebody if you believe they were going, you could be cured by something. I think there is something medically accurate about what the shamans do. It also appears, I think, the Nicola books when he's at the Tartar stronghold in the Crimea. That's a heck of a climb if any of you are thinking to do it. But the same way, they use the same technique. I'm afraid that's as far as I can go. Come on, which of the 15? Right, yes.
Are your works available as audiobooks? And if not, would you want to read them?
Oh, are they available as audiobooks and who do I like to read them? 3 of them are. Nicola Rising was done in Britain and written by read by a man called Stephen Pacey, who was, if anybody remembers, and I know it was over in the States, there was a children's serial called Blake Sevens. He played, was it Tarrant?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, Nicola Rising, and I'm told he's very good. I can't bear to listen to them, I never have. One of the Dolly books that was done, I think, the Moroccan traffic, and by, I think, a woman, and I'm told it wasn't entirely successful. And there's one just come out all over, including the States here, Game of Kings. It has been done by a company called Howes, Howes, at an exorbitant price. I mean, it's millions of tapes. There's the whole thing unabridged. But it depends on, if there are kind of 10 wealthy people buying it, you might do the second one.
Imagine how many tapes?
Yeah.
I can probably make a hash of a question that's been debated a lot lately. We have the text of the 14 volumes, and we have an author who has acknowledged the penchant for war games with the reader. So would you tell us something that's not on the printed page? Which do we need to trust more?
That's the printed page. It absolutely tells the truth. Yeah. Yes.
Perhaps this has been answered and I missed it somewhere, but fairly early in the series you mentioned that you had almost gotten yourself trapped by finding a fictional character that turned out to be historical. Who was that and what was the circumstance?
Oh yeah, well this is fascinating. Oh gosh, this is Catalina Sir Saunders. I had decided, of course, to link up the Adorn family with the Crawford family. The Crawford family are totally fictitious in the Lyman series. And I didn't want to get involved with historical Crawfords because they'd be going in the wrong direction, they'd be born the wrong time, die the wrong time, and I don't like linking them up anyway to fiction, so that is that. So I wasn't looking at Crawfords at all, but I was planning to bring over Anselm Adorn's daughter called Catalina, who appears briefly, I think, in the early Nicola books, and about whom really not very much is known. And I thought, all right, I'm going to preempt this poor girl and bring her over to Scotland, and she's going to marry into the Crawfords. Great, no? And then I was looking through very early records in Scotland, and noticed that his nephew, Anselm Adorn's nephew, Anselm, Sir Sanders, had come over as a trader to Scotland and settled there and stayed there for many, many years. In fact, ended his life early there. And there were a lot of records historians hadn't noticed, references to him, spelling his name with C as Seth Sanders, C-E-S-S instead of Sir Sanders. And I thought, oh golly, I've got all this new information, wonderful. So I followed it up, and then came across an entry for Catalina Sir Sanders. I thought, oh, wait a minute, they've been reading my books, isn't it? And then worse than that, found that she was not the daughter, she was a niece of Anselm Adorn, and that she had married a Robert Crawford. And it's terrifying! Because she's probably going to upset every person coming in. So, you know, and hastily, when did it die? And it was great. I had to, you know, yeah, it was great. But there we were. And so I had then to kind of renegotiate the story a bit. But without keeping absolutely true to the record. So she did actually exist. Robin existed. They lived for quite some time afterwards. We don't know exactly when they died. They lived well into the next century. But yeah, that was the glitch. I don't know. Yeah.
Do you have plans for another Dunnett companion, such as the last?
Plans for another Dunnett companion? Well, kind of watch this space, actually. There's going to be an announcement quite soon, I think. This is how my winter is preempted. I think that's what I'm going to have a visitor.
I'd like to thank you for the pleasure your books give me as a springboard for filling in my own sketchy education.
I felt the same.
Every once in a while, I'll come across something by chance, and in great excitement, I realize that you may have learned about this or used it as you were writing the books. One of those is Madame de Lafayette's The Princesse de Clèves.
Oh, yes, right.
And I wondered if you used that or thought of that as you were writing Queen's Flag.
I can't remember. Sorry, that's what I can't. Behind you?
I'd like to know if at one point Nicholas's actual father was in question, or whether the feeling I had through some of the early books that Fat Father Jordan was actually Nicholas's father was just a red herring.
Well, what made you think that? No, I had a lot of red herrings. In fact, if I'm talking to you tomorrow, it will be a little talk about red herrings. So, you can take it that Simon was his father. Yes. Yes.
I've been interested about the relative lack of religion among the main characters, given the news of the 15th and 16th centuries.
The lack of religion, yes. Yes, it was a difficult question to deal with. Religion, of course, is very important politically every other way. But if you introduce anything in great detail, and if you introduce it as a large component in your chief characters' lives, it is too much. It is absolutely too big a subject to deal with properly. So I dealt with it indirectly through Cardinal Bessarion, through God's Cock, through all the people who he meets and who teach him. And you of course hear in the course of the history, the motivation for it, the Reformation, the people who came over and landed in Staffordshire. So it covers the religion, but it tells you only indirectly what its effect on individuals. Because so much of it was political, so much that is, a little bit of reorientation going on just now in the view of what made these great surges of emotion and why they were put into practice. The Arabian Mary Tudors are case in point. When I came to research that, I ended up so sorry for her, and also realizing, it was almost any other woman in the same place would have had the same problem. And if you look at the difficulties each of them faced in their time, it was much more, it was religion plus a lot of other things. So I thought, no, it's going to be 45 books if I go on. Yeah?
Are you still painting? And did your artistic eye over the 40 years inform and enrich your writing?
Am I still painting, and did it help my writing? I think so. It's very handy when you're trying to memorize colours if you know how to mix them. I sort of look at a painting and think, yes, that's a bit of alizarin crimson, flake white, and whatever, and carry it back home and translate it into English, so to speak. I did it in the last painting before I started Gemini some time ago, actually, because I can't paint really when I'm writing, because I have to go to my sitter's homes quite often. And it's one of the Queen's chaplains, actually, in his robes and everything else. It's very down a few bottles of whiskey and had a nice time, and the painting's hanging up, I think, somewhere in Burma. I don't know whether I probably will paint again. I think it is a help when I'm working, but I'm not a wonderful writer, so I don't paint, so it's not a rule. But anyway, I enjoyed both. Question was which I was going to do. Yeah.
I wondered, Madame de Sévigné, the 17th century woman of letters, was she any influence in your choosing 70s?
She was a 7 years of childhood. No, I was very annoyed to find out about how many other 70s there were. In fact, that was one I did avoid. I changed the spelling of Savigny, not Savigny. But it's quite difficult to find something that was attractive, like number syllables and all that stuff. And I just recently found this a flirty wine, which is, it has its advantages. You pick on a name and think, oh, this is the motif of my life, and now on it's going to be very nice quiet called flirty. I haven't found a 7 yet, I think.
What was behind your decision to have two characters that each had a butter fixation?
I think I'm taking it out of somebody. I don't know. I don't think I really realized that was what I was doing. I had evolved. There wasn't any great purpose behind it. I think that's purely accidental in some way. I think when you're dealing with a series with so many different aspects and threads of plot and so on, you're probably bound to have crosswires here and there, or wires that are running in parallel. Where I could, I've made it credible that they were doing or the opposite of the same thing. But it's slightly different. I mean, the way regarded, I think, as I was saying when I was talking, the way regarded them is slightly different. That's all I can do to help you. Yeah, Lily?
Tell me why Kathy didn't collapse and didn't just become totally distraught when her daughter Margaret was killed at the end of Gemini. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand how she could keep going at that point.
Why? Who was it for? Kathy was shot when
Margaret Bearcroft was killed at the end.
Oh, when the child, yes, I thought I had shown her. It was very, very muted, all those scenes. And this is in the North Berwick convent, and she came back to find her. She found her uncle was dead and her daughter was dead. I was underwriting all the way through there. You have to think your way through. As when she went to the chapel, and I just say the singing became luminous at one point, and she realized that she'd said something, as it were. I can't remember at all. Did you get that? Or, yes.
I got that, but I still didn't see how she could have kept going.
How she could have kept going, having lost her child. I think my thinking of that would be that there was so much going on. I mean, everybody was keeping going after the most terrible things had been happening. And she knew about the death of Julie. She had all of that on her mind. I think one can. I think I mean, she'd probably collapsed totally when the whole thing was over. But at that time, you just keep going as well as you can, I think. Right? Somebody in the back, but yes,
Hi, I just had a follow-up to the portrait, about the portrait painting. We all in our own minds conjure up images of some of the characters, especially the fictional ones. Did you ever, as an artist, ever sit down and just sketch some of the
Did I ever paint on my character?
Paint your imagination.
Yeah, I painted Archie Abernethy. This is another. I should begin by saying I don't think it's a good idea to put even on the jacket cover a picture of the hero or any of the characters. I think we all have our own ideas of what they look like. I know roughly what that would look like, but I'd hate to paint them. I'd never get it. And I wasn't thinking of, this is why it's so difficult when you're thinking of actors or whatever, because I deliberately have nobody in mind. I'm creating individual people in my own mind for all of these. But this is somebody in Canada, a man in Canada, who said, would I paint for him as a commission? It is a characters in the Bible books, not lions, and he rather liked the idea of Archie Abernethy. So I did Archie Abernethy with his elephants and everything. The first gentleman died before I finished it, and his women didn't want it. So I've got a picture of Archie Abernethy with him. It was very fun, bald in the sky. I watched boxers on television for ages to see what broken nose looked like. So, No, I think, don't you, that we all like to think ourselves. I did say at one point, I mentioned Della Rovia Angel in connection with Limelight, and I gather that the whole of Italy has been traversed by you. I'm sorry, there's somebody not here. Yes.
I think for me the most intriguing line left hanging, for me anyway, in the book, was the Dom's line to Francis, the marriage will stand, I promised your grandfather. Now that we finally know who the grandfathers are, which grandfather was the promise made?
It could have been either.
And under what circumstances? I mean, what precipitated that kind
I don't know. I wasn't there at that time. But I made very, very sure it could be either grandfather. That they were alive on there and she could have spoken to. No matter which grandfather she thought she was speaking to, they were both there. So yeah, thanks. Good question. Yes.
Is there any factual basis for the football game on the roof of Edinburgh Castle and the race over the roofs in Blois?
Was there any factual basis for the football game in Edinburgh Castle and the race over the roofs? What? Yes. I'm glad to know. The football, well, the place of the Edinburgh race, I don't know, it's very likely they would do something like that, but it was a game which was valid in Italy at the time, which Nicholas would have brought that with him, and that was the way it was played. But I think I perched them all up just to make it more dangerous and fun and so on. And what's the other
The
one?
race over the roofs?
The race over the roofs. Yes, it was kind of, there are, Rob Tom, I think, is the chap for all the kind of gossip of what went on in the French court. And they all got drunk, they all did crazy things. And one of the things they did was rooftop racing. Not necessarily at Blois, although that's another place that has been fairly well tracked over by people with Queen's Play in hand. Somebody came back and said, why doesn't the town clerk of Blois put up a notice saying this is the way to the roof race?
Writing the books, either in order to decide where to scatter some of those, or did you ever imagine other ways that you could marshal the red herrings and the evidence and pull other threads and make the story come out some other way, or was it fairly firmly established in your mind?
It was very firmly established, and it had to be fitted into history. This is one reason why. There's this absolutely solid structure right from the beginning, and within that, I had really to decide on a fiction very early and stick to it because the clues were all there and that was it, and I couldn't diverge from it. And I know everybody started worrying about when I was going to read everybody's reactions and start changing the story. And there's just no way. The one great value of getting feedback, really, is to show me where I have unintentionally misled people. And of course, this is rather interesting because I don't do it intentionally. Unless I explain myself later on if I do. But perhaps a couple of times where I have said something unthinkingly without realizing it could be interpreted in another way. And then later on, if I got some feedback which told me that, I could then correct it. But which is worth doing. I mean, I'm all for posting up any outright mistakes I really find because they're such a nuisance. If you're trying to disentangle the plot, you don't want to be confused by things that the author has got wrong. I think, and I sort of pathetically, when somebody points out there are no ties in the Mediterranean and stuff like that, I think, well, each of my books is equivalent to 4 books in length. And I've written actually 16, so I've written 60 novels. And I think the percentage of error is pretty low.